Coach Travis back here to have a discussion to help you guys become better rowers. And today's topic, we're going to be talking about the relationship between stroke rate and your power output or your force output. And this is going to be particularly important for anybody, certainly kind of in the indoor rowing sector that hasn't been kind of trained as a rower on the water, and for the vast majority of on the water rowers who are either young or haven't had the opportunity to kind of be receive instruction from a top level coach. And even a lot of athletes that I've seen that have been coached at a high level haven't really grasped and embraced this concept to the fullest. All right, and so we're going to be talking about that relationship between power and your stroke rate, with particular emphasis on when you are building power and when you are settling down with that power. So we're going to talk about kind of shifting up in stroke rate, shifting down in stroke rate effectively, ways that you can tell that you're building power effectively, whether you are just rowing on the water or whether you are rowing on land, or a combination of the two. So the most important thing, the most important concept here, especially for the athletes that are rowing on the water, is that the speed of the boat on the recovery is dependent upon what you do on the drive. All right, and so your recovery speed should not exceed the speed of the boat. So ideally you're not moving your body backwards in the boat, that the boat is coming to you. All right, and you may let it come to you at its full speed, or you may slow yourself down a little bit so that you move forward slower than the boat is moving forward from that outside third person perspective. All right, but regardless, what you definitely want to avoid doing is moving your body backwards to the stern, or in the case of the indoor rower, towards the flywheel at a rate that is not justified by either the speed of the boat or the speed of the leg drive. All right, and if you are a young rower, all right, this is really going to mean the difference between you making first boat, second boat. It is a skill that's really necessary to kind of be performing kind of at the top of your peers, and certainly as you kind of advance and your focus turns from your performance within the team to your performance outside and against other teams, it's going to become exponentially more important. All right, and a good rule of thumb, and I see this a lot, when people are training, when you are shifting up in stroke rate, a lot of people will simply kind of move their body faster on the recovery first, and then that drive will catch up to it. All right, so the stroke rate will increase, and then the power is playing catch up. All right, and that's a very, very bad habit to get into. All right, whenever you're shifting up in the stroke rate, you always want to initiate that shift on the drive. All right, and so you kind of, like, tell my athletes, you kind of want to be rowing like you're playing poker. All right, and you're holding your hand on that last recovery, and nobody knows what you've got in that hand. Nobody knows that you're about to increase your power and shift up until you begin the drive. All right, and so you don't want to reveal your hand. You don't want to reveal on the recovery what's about to happen on that drive coming up. All right, so you've got to maintain the rhythm, and then when you want to shift that rhythm up, you shift it through that drive sequence. And then, especially if you're on the water, once you've increased the force through the drive and therefore the speed of the boat, then the recovery speed should naturally go a little faster because the boat is moving faster. And then you need to do that a couple more times, and that's why we take 2 to 3 or more strokes to build the speed of the boat. All right, because you can only increase the speed so much on a per stroke basis. All right, and you don't want to be jamming that stroke rate up, getting ahead of yourself of where your power application is going to be. And if you're on the erg, a really great way to do this is to simply either record, or you can do a little, if you get the erg data app on your phone, and you can do a little screen record whenever you're doing a build, and then you can see every stroke, what your stroke rate and split are going to be, or you can have somebody else watch you, or if you have a really good memory, you can just kind of watch it and remember what the stroke rate and split are for the first 4, 5, 6 strokes of any build. And what you want to be asking yourself there is the relationship between the stroke rate that you're seeing on each of those individual strokes and its relationship with the split that you're pulling, is that a relationship that you would want to see in your regular training? All right, so let's take an example. All right, so I always kind of use this kind of 640, 635-ish athlete, male as an example, because I've coached a lot of them, and so those numbers stick in my head. So let's say you have an athlete that can pull 139 for 2,000 meters. All right, so 139 for 2,000 meters. Their steady state split, let's say, is 158 for UT2, maybe 153, 154 for UT1. Their AT split is going to be probably somewhere around 147. Their transport split somewhere around a 143. All right. So for that athlete, if that athlete is building, all right, and let's say they're doing a build, they're rowing at their steady state, 158, and they want to take a couple strokes and they want to do a 20-stroke build to whatever their target 2,000 meter pace is, so 139. And so a lot of times what you'll see with those athletes is you freeze frame, you take that erg data app, or you have someone watching and you see is that you're going to see something like their stroke rate is going to be probably 28 on the first stroke, maybe 34, 35 on the second stroke, and if they're staying there, then hopefully they'll kind of be at that. A lot of times athletes will go over their target rate and then settle back down. That's another big no-no. We'll talk about that in a sec. But let's say that athlete is built, all right, so their stroke rate has gone up in 1 or 2 strokes, 28, 35, 35 being their target. But their split after that first stroke is about a 150, let's say 155. They haven't built that much, and then the next one they're at probably 145, and then the third stroke they're hitting around 140, 139 by the fourth, fifth stroke. All right, so you're going 158. You're at your steady state. You start your build. You see 155, 154, 144, 145, and then 139, 140 for that third stroke. All right, so it's taking you 3 strokes, all right, 3-4 strokes to build to what your target 2K pace is. But if you remember what we said on the stroke rate was they went 18, 28, 34, 35, and then they stayed there for the rest. All right, so they're the same stroke rate for their second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on strokes. All right, then if you take that step back and you look at that and you say, all right, this athlete pulled a 155 split at a 28 stroke rate. And then you want to step back and say, okay, is that if you were doing a piece at a 28 stroke rate, a full pressure, is a 155 an appropriate split for that athlete? And the answer is no. All right, 28 is a split that's going to be characteristic of AT training, and you're pulling a 155, which isn't quite a UT1 split. All right, and so you're at a UT1 pressure on that one stroke, but you're at an AT stroke rate. All right, so that is creating rush. All right, and it's an inefficient build. And then you take that a step further, and you're saying, all right, well, on that second stroke they were at a 144, 145 split, but they were already at their target split of that 35, all right? So then that 35 should be their 2K split. So if they're at a 35, you should be pulling a 139. But instead, they're pulling a 144, which is more characteristic of a little mid-range AT and transport. So maybe like a 30-31 split is justified for a 144. And so you look at that either as a coach or as an athlete, and if you're watching that individual relationship of the stroke rate and the split on each of those individual strokes, that is a very easy way to tell, are they building their stroke rate effectively? All right, and so this athlete didn't, all right, because on their first stroke, instead of going up to a 28, and let's say that their split build was what it should have been, 155, 144, 139, all right, 3 strokes to get to that from UT2 to 2K race pace, which is an appropriate amount of strokes to make that build. 155 after that first stroke, they should have been at a UT1 type of split, so maybe like a 22-23. The next stroke they were at a 144, and just like we said, that's more appropriate for like a 30-31. And then the last stroke, they should be able to get to that third stroke at their 2K pace. They're at that 139. That's when they should be hitting the 35, all right? So what that build should have been is you're rowing UT2, 18 stroke rate, 158. First stroke, 22-23, 155. Next stroke, 30-ish at a 144. next stroke 35 at a 139, 140. That is going to be an effective build for that athlete, all right? And if you see this, certainly as a coach, you have those athletes do it, you're gonna find even your top athletes, certainly as a youth coach, a lot of them just don't do this. They don't build effectively unless you've really hammered it into them, all right? And this is going to be something that you can practice anytime that you're doing any kind of intervals or building on the erg. I would tell my athletes, and we actually spent a couple days working on this the last season that I coached, of the very first stroke that you take when you sit down on an erg. A lot of people will sit down on an erg, they'll just pick up the handle, they'll start their legs moving, and then they'll start pulling a couple strokes later. All right, that's a horrible habit to get into. So anytime you're either starting to row or you're increasing your pressure is an opportunity to develop muscle memory and to develop good habits for building your pressure effectively. And so what you want to do when every time you sit down on an erg is you want to sit there, you want to make sure your hips are in a good position, make sure your feet are where they need to be, lay hold of the handle, get your body in a good position, get your connection front, and then from the very first stroke, pressure. And then on the very first recovery, patience, all right? So first stroke, get a good pressure, be patient, get a good pressure, be patient from stroke number one, all right? And another kind of bad habit that rowers on the water rowers would get into is when they're taking easy strokes, they'll lose this relationship between their pressure and cadence as well, all right? And kind of the big glaring area is when you're stopping and spinning a boat, all right? Or for me, that was on a river where you stop, you spin halfway, you cross the river, you spin the rest of the way, and you go. We would spend, it would be a technically focused practice where we're specifically focusing on various technique things. We'll stop to spin, and then the moment those athletes are rowing across the river, they're rowing like total crap again. All right, all those bad habits are coming back. All right, and it's just like, why are you taking strokes where you're not focused? And it also tells me kind of as a coach, and I would always tell my athletes when they're like, oh, what are we doing for selection? I'm selecting you every day. Everything you do, I'm looking at you, because everything you do when you don't know you're being selected is telling me what your habits are. And when you're in the third 500, last 500, 2,000 meters, it doesn't matter what you want to do, your habit is going to take over, and your training is going to develop habit, all right? And if you want to perform well in that third, fourth, 500 meters, then you will have to have trained the habit of rowing well and rowing aggressively and keeping your posture and keeping your composure and making sure you're following the people in front of you. All those things are going to come out when your physical effort breaks down kind of that mental focus, the mental control, and you kind of start to get a little bit more into the realm of instinct. But back to what I was saying is, when you're on the water, when you're paddling on the erg, when you're just kind of starting to warm up, when you're first laying hold of the erg, every stroke is a chance to kind of develop these habits. And that does not mean that you have to pull hard. Like if you're getting there, you're sitting on an erg, you're going to do a steady state, you expect to be kind of settling into 158 2-minute split for that steady state. That doesn't mean that very first stroke that you pick up has to be a 2-minute split that you see. No, it's, the pressure and the recovery are always related, all right? And so you want to, if you have a patient recovery, you want to put some pressure into it. It doesn't have to be super hard pressure, but it doesn't need to be firm. And then the speed that you return to the front end, the speed that you return to the catch needs to be represented by the speed of the drive, all right? It needs to be a reflection, all right? Maybe is a better word, all right? The speed of the recovery needs to be a reflection of the speed of the drive. And then conversely, when you are bringing the pressure down or when you're shifting down, there also needs, and this is way harder, all right? It's way harder, especially when you're coming off of high pressure and you're tired at the end of a piece or whatnot, to shift down effectively. But you also need to drill in this habit of, if you're coming off of pressure, all right, you got 5 more strokes, and then it's paddle, all right? You finish that 5th stroke, and the moment you hit that recovery, that's when the rest begins. You're slow. You know, you're taking those strokes, boom, boom, boom. Arms are slow, body's slow, nice light pressure through the drive, and go. What people do, you're rowing, and then, I'm tired, all right, I'm done. You know, or even worse is they're rowing, and then, okay. And then they still have a couple like just ugly, fast, uncontrolled recoveries, or they're rowing at zero pressure. They're putting nothing on the handle. Again, this is developing bad muscle memory, all right? And muscle memory is key in a sport like rowing. And so, especially for those athletes, any athlete that expects to perform in the top 5% or so of competition, if you don't have control of your body when you're tired, you're not going to be there, all right? You know, you may aspire to be there, but you're not going to be there, because the people that are learning and teaching themselves to control their movements, whether they're fresh, whether they're tired, whether it's a focus point of their workout, or whether it's just sitting there picking up the handle to start a warm-up, or turning the boat on the water and rowing across the river, the athletes that have trained themselves to have focus in all of those situations are the athletes that are going to have the focus in that third, fourth, 500 meters when instincts start to take over desire, all right, and over your kind of logic. And then coming back to that building, a couple rules that I can kind of throw out there for you guys is that when you are building your pressure and building your stroke rates, generally there's a certain amount of strokes that you should take for every degree of build that you're going to do, all right? And so I think a rough estimate of that is going to be for every maybe 6 to 8 stroke rate that you're increasing, take about 1 stroke to do that, all right? And so if you're going from an 18 up just U1 pace, all right, you should be able to do that in 1 stroke. You should be able to go from an 18 to a 24 and from a 158 for our example athlete to a 154, 1 stroke. But if you're building from that 18 up to a 36, 37, you know, 2K rate, then it takes 3 strokes, all right? 1 stroke to get to 24, another stroke to get to 30, another stroke to get to 36, all right? And you need to use this in everything that you're doing. And so a favorite workout that I like to do for AT is actually kind of a family of workouts. It's a family of 140-20s, so minute 40 off, or minute 40 on, 20 seconds off, usually 24 to 26 stroke rates. And you might do that for anywhere from 14 to 20 minutes at a time. And then that 140-20s, I have a sub-family that I do for less experienced athletes, so 130-30s or 120-40s. And generally the 140-20s I'll only give for really high-performance athletes or athletes that are kind of close to their competitive phase or in their competitive phase. Usually the 120-40s are great for masters athletes and for novice youth, and the 130-30s are great for very experienced masters athletes or a varsity level youth athlete. But in all of those intervals, those rises, so we never set the monitor so that it's a 130 interval, 30-second rest, all right? We just set it for a 16-minute interval, and they kind of do those builds and paddles within it. But I'll talk to those athletes and I'll say, every time you shift up, you need to practice building your stroke rate effectively, all right? So every time you finish that 30-second paddle, it's 2, 3 firm strokes to get to your target rate, and then you settle in and go, all right? And it's like every time, and that's why I say when you're training, every time you're building up pressure, every time you're building up stroke rate, practice building through the drive and not just jacking up the stroke rate, all right? And finally, I alluded to this earlier in this video, but a lot of athletes have this tendency that when they're building, they're going to overshoot their target and then come back. And so if I have an athlete, we're going to do a 20-stroke build to 2K pace. They're rowing at their steady state. They start to build, let's say their 2K target stroke rate is 35. So they build, stroke rate gets up to 38. They went a little bit too far, and then they settle back in. All right? It's a horrible habit, all right? It's a horrible habit, especially if you're doing a short build. If you're just building from UT2 to UT1, going from 18 to 24, athletes, if you don't kind of rein them in, they're almost always going to kind of jack that stroke rate up to 27, 28, and then settle back down to that target where they're supposed to be. All right. And what I tell the athletes is like, look, if you're an architect and you're building for my building, and you say, I'm going to build this skyscraper. You want a 25-story skyscraper? Well, I'm going to build you a 30-story skyscraper. That's a tongue twister. 30-story skyscraper. And then I'm going to knock down the top 5 floors because you don't want those. And I'm going to be like, are you nuts? All right. And that's what I look at when athletes, and I tell them to build to a 24. And they go up to a 28, and then they come back down to a 24. All right. So on the erg, it's just a horrible habit. What that tells me about what that athlete is doing in the water, on the boat, is those athletes are making everybody in front of them, their life, a living hell. And if that's the stroke doing it, then they're very bad at bringing that boat to pace effectively, all right? And chances are that's when you're gonna get those boats that just feel heavy, all right, because there's no rhythm in the boat, all right? If you can't effectively build your rhythm from 18 to 24 without hitting a 28 on your way there, or you can't build your stroke rate from 18 to a 35 without hitting a 38, 39, and then coming back, that's a problem. That means that you're not effectively building a good rhythm, a good power per stroke, all right? And so that's another thing that you can work on, whether you're an indoor rower, all right? Because even if you're an indoor rower and you're not caring about how a boat moves on the water and effectively moving in the boat, there's still the need to develop a good power per stroke, all right? Because every time you're moving forward, all right, that's negative speed, all right? That's effort, all right, that is not producing impulse, all right? And so you want to develop an effective relationship between the amount of times that you go through the drive and the power that you're producing on the drive and the number of times that you're going on the recovery in order to produce that split, all right? And so if you're building, all right, and you're always going above your target and then settling back in, you need to work on that, all right? You need to work on building through the drive. You need to work on building a little bit more gradually. And if you're supposed to be going to a 24, go to a 24, all right? Take a stroke or two to get there. Make sure, again, that your split that you're seeing on every stroke between where you were and where you're going is appropriate, all right? Relationship between stroke rate and split, all right? If you're pulling an AT stroke rate, make sure you're pulling an AT split. Pulling a UT1 stroke rate, make sure you're pulling a UT1 split, all right? Don't pull a UT1 stroke rate and an AT split. Actually, that's backwards. That's not bad, all right? Going low on your stroke rate is not bad. Don't pull an AT stroke rate and a UT1 split, all right? So don't be underpowered, all right? Don't be underpowered on the stroke rate that you're seeing. But that's it, all right? So that covers that topic. You need to be aware of that relationship at all times. If you're familiar with what your speed is at each of those stroke rates for an elongated interval, that is the stroke rate that you should be pulling on any individual strokes, regardless of what you're doing. All right, there's no reason to ever break that rule, break that relationship, whether you're just building up for a couple strokes, whether you're going down and you're paddling for a couple strokes, whether you're just taking your first couple strokes on a warm-up, whether you're rowing the boat across the river to make a turn, whatever it may be, you must train yourself to have an effective power per stroke. And that's it. All right. So I hope that guys helped you guys share. If it did help you, share with somebody who you think it would benefit. Certainly any kind of youth novice athletes or even early varsity athletes, most masters athletes that didn't learn how to row in college, certainly any indoor rowing athlete that hasn't had professional rowing instruction. I'm sure they could all benefit from this. But that's it. Like, if you have a comment, you have a question, put it down below. I'm happy to answer so long as I have time, especially if they're constructive and they kind of help augment the conversation that I'm having in these videos. I love those questions. I'm always happy to answer them. And that's it. So thanks again, guys, and we'll catch you on the next video. Bye.